At the start of the war, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson declared that the United States would not get involved with the Great War. Wilson felt the war was strictly a European conflict between the powers of that continent and their colonies. Wilson was determined to keep U.S. soldiers out of European trenches. Led by Wilson, the U.S. government at the beginning of the war adopted a policy of isolation and neutrality. So how did Americans feel about the war? We know how their president felt, and most Americans agreed with Wilson. Especially after hearing about the horrors of trench warfare, Americans were glad that they had avoided such a horrible conflict. But the U.S. was also full of European American immigrants, people who had come to live in the U.S. from Europe. And because of their connections to Europe, public opinion often varied by ethnic groups. For example, Irish Americans were very anti-British, so they generally favored the Central Powers, as did many German Americans. Other Americans who were of English or Scottish descent favored the Allies. Because the U.S. was neutral, it did not sign any treaties or make any allies with Europeans. However, U.S. trade did favor or help out the Allies. Americans sold the British food, weapons, ammunition, and other war supplies that they did not offer to the Central Powers. And this made Germany mad because it kept Britain's wartime economy strong. The U.S. only became entangled in the Great War when it started to hurt their economy. What the Germans started to do was they had this policy called unrestricted submarine warfare, which meant that German submarines floating around the Atlantic would attack civilian and commercial ships, not just enemy warships. They were attacking privately owned ships too. And the Germans said that they carried out these attacks because many commercial ships were bringing supplies across the Atlantic to help the Allies. But eventually, this policy led to the U.S. involvement in World War I and Germany's ultimate defeat. The sinking of the Lusitania was very important in getting the U.S. involved in World War I. It happened on May 7, 1915, when a German U-boat torpedoed a British passenger ship called the Lusitania. It killed 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. Now, the Germans claimed that they attacked this passenger ship because it was carrying supplies for the Allies. Upset by the loss of American life, President Wilson threatened to end diplomatic relations with Germany if they didn't stop their policy of unrestricted submarine warfare. After the sinking of the Lusitania, the Germans stopped unrestricted submarine warfare because of the American threat, or at least they stopped for a little bit. And because Woodrow Wilson was able to keep the U.S. out of World War I, he was re-elected as president in 1916. However, it was not long before Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, which they did on February 1, 1917. And this policy, the Germans saying that they would attack any merchant ships heading to Great Britain, threatened American business because American traders were profiting from trade with Great Britain. As a result of this announcement, President Wilson formally ended diplomatic relations with Germany. An even bigger event, known as the Zimmermann telegram, shocked Americans in March of 1917. British intelligence officers intercepted a message, a telegram, that was sent from Germany to Mexico. It was sent by Arthur Zimmermann, who was the Foreign Secretary of the German Empire. And basically, this telegram said that the Germans expected the U.S. to declare war against them, and Germany was asking for Mexico's help. Germany said that it would give Mexico control of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if the Mexicans would attack the U.S. and help Germany win the war. The reaction to the Zimmermann telegram in the U.S. was tense. When American newspapers published the stories, Americans across the country were outraged that Germany would try to start the war and bring it to America. In addition, Germans soon sank multiple American ships in the Atlantic, and that was the final straw. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. As most Americans now supported a war because of the attacks on American ships and the Zimmermann telegram, on April 6th, Congress voted to declare war on Germany, and the U.S. entered World War I. Once Congress declared war, Americans and the American economy geared up for battle. The U.S. drafted 2.8 million men within months. They sent these men to Europe along with submarines, battleships, and other much-needed supplies. American soldiers were known as the AEF, or American Expeditionary Forces, and they were led by Army General John J. Pershing. The first American troops were known as doughboys, and they were in France by June of 1917, and they were on the front lines of the Western Front, helping the Allies win the war by October. With America's involvement in World War I, fresh American troops and supplies reinvigorated the Allied efforts after 3 years of tough trench warfare, and eventually the impact of American troops would soon help turn the war in the Allies' favor.